Imagine being stranded on a train in the middle of a forest for hours, with no phone signal, rescue still several hours away, and something outside beginning to hunt the passengers trapped inside. The film opens by introducing a man named Joe who works as a train conductor in London, England. Unfortunately, it seems that luck is definitely not on Joe's side that night. Not only does he fail to receive the supervisor promotion he has been hoping for, but he is also forced to take an extra shift because one of his coworkers has called in sick. Because of this, he ends up working on a late-night train bound for Eastbourne alongside a train attendant named Ellen and the train driver, John. As usual, after the train begins its journey, Joe announces all the upcoming stops before the final destination. He then starts checking the passengers' tickets one by one. However, the passengers quickly begin testing his patience during the trip. A dog suddenly startles him. A woman named Kate panics after realizing she has lost her ticket, and Nina, a rebellious teenage girl, behaves rudely and carelessly. During his hectic shift, Joe briefly asks Ellen whether she would like to grab a drink together after work, but she immediately rejects the idea. As the journey continues, more passengers gradually get off at their respective destinations, leaving the train to carry on toward its final stop in Eastbourne. But as the rain becomes heavier outside, the atmosphere suddenly shifts when the train unexpectedly comes to a stop in the middle of the tracks. Just as Joe is about to make his way to the driver's cabin to find out what is going on, John makes an announcement, explaining that the train has suffered a technical problem and that the journey will resume once it has been repaired. While the passengers begin wondering what is happening, Joe helps Ellen clean up the food trolley, which was thrown into disarray by the sudden braking, with assistance from a passenger named Adrian. Afterward, Joe checks on the remaining passengers, helps an elderly couple named Ged and Jenny collect their groceries that had fallen onto the floor, and also deals with Kate, who complains that her laptop suddenly stopped working after the incident. Meanwhile, without anyone realizing it, John quietly gets off the train by himself to investigate the reason for the sudden stop. He soon discovers that the train has struck a deer, leaving its body trapped on the tracks. However, while examining the area in the darkness of the surrounding forest, John suddenly hears a strange noise coming from deeper within the woods. Before he has any chance to react, a terrifying two-legged figure suddenly emerges from the darkness and attacks him. From its appearance alone, it is clear that this creature is nothing like an ordinary animal. When John fails to return, Joe gradually starts to suspect that something is seriously wrong. Nevertheless, to prevent the passengers from panicking, he asks Ellen to distribute snacks throughout the train and keep everyone calm. Joe also attempts to contact the station through the radio and request assistance. Unfortunately, because of the terrible weather and trees that have fallen across the route, the rescue team will not be able to reach them for at least another 4 hours. Once the passengers hear this news, the tension inside the train begins to build. People like Kate, Nina, and Jenny become increasingly frustrated, especially because nobody has any idea where John has gone. Amid the growing panic, Adrian proposes what he believes are their only two choices. They can either remain inside the train and wait for help, or walk along the railway tracks toward Eastbourne, which is estimated to be roughly 4 to 5 kilometers away. The second option quickly seems more practical to some of the passengers, particularly because there is absolutely no signal in the middle of the forest, meaning none of them can call for help. Before long, most of the passengers agree that they should leave the train and walk toward the next station. However, Joe immediately objects, pointing out that safety regulations strictly prohibit passengers from leaving the train outside designated station areas. Unfortunately, the pressure from the others continues to increase until Joe has no choice but to unlock the train doors and supervise everyone as they step outside. At first, everything appears completely normal, but after walking only a few meters from the train, everyone suddenly stops when they notice a shadowy figure slowly moving behind the bushes. Curious but concerned, Joe and Ellen cautiously move closer to find out what it is. What they find immediately leaves both of them horrified. John's body is discovered in a gruesome state, covered with horrific wounds that make it obvious he was attacked by something monstrous. Realizing that the situation has now turned into a deadly threat, Joe and Ellen immediately order everyone to get back inside the train. However, As they desperately rush towards safety, the mysterious creature attacks once again, managing to bite Jenny on the leg before everyone finally gets back inside. The incident instantly sends the entire train into chaos, as nobody has any idea what kind of creature is hunting them in the middle of the forest that night. Once they are safely back inside, Ellen and Joe quickly try to stop the bleeding from Jenny's leg after the creature's attack. Unfortunately, the wound continues bleeding without stopping. The already terrifying situation becomes even worse when Joe is about to lock the train door, only for something outside to suddenly slam violently into the side of the carriage. What the hell was that? For a brief moment, the horrifying creature can be seen through the window, revealing enormous hands covered with sharp claws that clearly do not belong to any ordinary human. Realizing that their situation is becoming more dangerous with every passing second, Joe quickly tries contacting Eastbourne Station to request emergency assistance. Unfortunately, the radio communication system, which is their only chance of getting help, is already damaged and completely useless. Amid the panic, one of the passengers named Billy, who has an engineering background, decides to examine the control panel inside the driver's cabin. After inspecting the system, Billy determines that the earlier collision most likely caused a fuel leak while also damaging several components of the train, meaning they will not be able to get it moving again anytime soon. With no other options available, Joe finally informs all the passengers that they have no choice but to stay inside the train until help arrives. However, instead of reassuring everyone, his announcement only makes the tension even worse. The passengers begin wondering what kind of creature is lurking outside, especially after Jenny, who briefly caught a glimpse of the attacker, claims that it looked much more human than animal. Her statement makes everyone even more frightened, particularly because Joe still refuses to reveal what truly happened to John outside the train. Before anyone has a chance to calm down, a loud banging noise suddenly comes from the rear carriage. Joe, Billy, and Adrian immediately hurry toward the sound, which appears to be coming from a shaking toilet door, as though someone is trapped inside. When they open the door, they discover a passenger named Tom hiding inside the toilet, completely unaware of how disastrous the situation outside has become.
For a short while, everything seems peaceful again, but that calm does not last very long. The entire train suddenly begins shaking again as violent impacts strike from outside, while the lights start flickering continuously. In the middle of the chaos, Nina's phone suddenly picks up a signal and receives a call from her mother. Panicking, Nina attempts to explain what has happened and give her the location of the stranded train. However, before she can finish the conversation, the mysterious creature suddenly smashes through the train window and violently drags Nina outside in front of the horrified passengers. The sudden attack sends everyone into complete panic, forcing them to flee toward the rear carriage. Adrian even uses his belt to secure the door shut, preventing the creature from getting inside. Amid the fear and confusion, several passengers begin blaming each other and gradually lose hope of surviving. However, Ged, the elderly man who has stayed calm throughout the entire ordeal, reminds everyone that their only chance of survival is to work together. Joe and Billy immediately open the emergency toolbox, taking out axes, hammers, and other tools that can potentially be used as weapons. The passengers then work together to barricade the doors and windows with anything they can find, hoping to prevent the creature from breaking its way inside. But while everyone else is focused on surviving, Adrian secretly tries to convince Joe to escape with him and leave the others behind. According to Adrian, remaining inside the train will only result in a slow and inevitable death. He even attempts to persuade Joe by showing him the keys to his luxurious house and apartment, promising him money if Joe agrees to escape with him. As the tension continues to rise, Jenny's condition suddenly takes a drastic turn for the worse. She begins vomiting black blood, while her teeth slowly start falling out one after another. The bite on her leg also looks increasingly horrifying, as if something inside her body is spreading. Meanwhile, Tom, who had survived the earlier attacks, suddenly goes to the toilet alone in the next carriage. Worried that the area might be dangerous, Joe follows him. But just as Joe reaches the toilet door, the creature suddenly appears and attacks Tom without warning, killing him instantly. The door is jammed. Joe has no choice but to retreat into the carriage where the others are waiting. However, while everyone desperately tries to barricade the doors with whatever objects they can find, the creature easily manages to break into the train. For the first time, all of the passengers get a clear look at the monster. They discover that the creature is actually a werewolf, a gigantic humanoid beast possessing incredible strength and razor-sharp claws. Despite being terrified, the passengers eventually gather the courage to fight back, using axes, hammers, and any other sharp objects they can find inside the carriage. A brutal battle erupts, but after a fierce struggle, they finally succeed in killing the creature. Yet, once the werewolf is dead, they discover something even more disturbing. The monster had once been an ordinary human, as proven by the wedding ring still wrapped around its finger. After seeing this, Ged begins telling the others about a mysterious incident that took place in the same forest back in 1963. At that time, another train had broken down almost exactly where they are stranded now. When the rescue teams eventually arrived, they discovered that not a single passenger had survived. Some of the victims' bodies were found in horrifying conditions. Ever since then, nobody has truly known what kind of creatures live within the forest. Ged gradually becomes convinced that what is happening tonight must somehow be connected to that tragedy from decades ago.
However, their discussion suddenly stops when the werewolf they believed was dead unexpectedly starts moving again and lets out a terrifying roar. Refusing to take any chances, Joe immediately grabs a weapon and repeatedly smashes the monster's head until he is absolutely certain that it will never get back up. Even after successfully killing one of the werewolves, the tension inside the train does not ease. Instead, it becomes even more intense. Jenny, who had previously been suffering from nothing more than the bite wound, slowly begins developing strange symptoms. Adrian starts suspecting that the creature's bite contains some kind of infection capable of transforming humans into werewolves. Believing that the greatest threat may now be inside the train itself, Adrian suggests killing Jenny before she has the chance to turn. However, the other passengers immediately stop him, especially Ged, who clearly cannot accept the idea of watching his own wife being killed despite the increasingly unnatural changes in her condition. To prevent anything dangerous from happening, Joe eventually decides to tie Jenny up and restrain her. Adrian is also tied up after the others begin considering his behavior selfish and dangerous. Meanwhile, their only real chance of escaping the forest is to somehow get the train running again. Because of this, Billy decides to go outside and repair the damaged fuel line with another passenger named Matt, who takes an axe with him in case the creatures return. Before heading outside, Billy briefly teaches Ellen how to operate the train controls inside the driver's cabin in case they manage to restart the engine. At the same time, Joe uses the train's speaker system to speak to all the remaining passengers. He apologizes, admitting that he feels like he has failed to keep everyone safe since this nightmare began. Even so, Joe reminds them that working together is the only way any of them have a chance of surviving. Shortly after leaving the carriage, Billy finally finds the damaged fuel hose and begins trying to seal it with tape and whatever tools he can find. Meanwhile, Matt remains on guard, carefully watching the tracks in the surrounding forest for any sign of the creatures. Back inside the train, the atmosphere remains extremely tense when Kate reveals that she once applied for a position at Adrian's company. However, rather than paying attention to her qualifications or resume, Adrian spent the entire interview staring at her appearance, which ultimately resulted in Kate being rejected. The conversation only makes Adrian's selfish personality even more obvious. Not long afterward, Matt suddenly hears Nina's voice calling for help from somewhere deep within the forest. Even though the situation is clearly dangerous, he foolishly decides to follow the voice, hoping that Nina might somehow still be alive. Unfortunately, that decision quickly becomes a fatal mistake. When Matt reaches the location, he discovers Nina's body in a horrifying condition. Before he can even think about escaping, he realizes that the creatures hunting them are not alone. Several werewolves suddenly emerge from the darkness and surround him from every direction, eventually making Matt their next victim. His screams, followed by the terrifying howls of the werewolves, frighten everyone inside the train even more. Strangely, At that exact moment, Jenny, who is still tied up, begins reacting in a disturbing manner after hearing the howls. Her teeth slowly become sharper, while her behavior grows increasingly aggressive with every passing second. Outside, Billy's repair efforts finally succeed, and the train engine suddenly comes back to life. However, a new problem immediately arises because Billy cannot safely return to the carriage. Two werewolves are roaming dangerously close to him, forcing him to remain outside.
At the same time, Joe and Ellen, who are inside the driver's cabin, suddenly panic when two creatures unexpectedly appear directly in front of the train. Out of sheer fear, Ellen accidentally pulls the control lever, causing the train to suddenly start moving again. As a result, Billy, who is still outside, has no choice but to grab onto the underside of the moving train while desperately trying not to fall. Although he manages to hold on for a while, Billy gradually begins losing his strength. As the train continues moving, he realizes that he cannot keep hanging on forever. With no other option available, Billy desperately removes the patch he had previously placed over the damaged fuel line. He knows that doing so will cause the fuel to start leaking again and force the train to stop, but it is the only way he can save himself. And exactly as he expects, once the fuel begins leaking again, the train gradually loses power before eventually coming to a stop in the middle of the forest once more. However, at that exact moment, things inside the carriage become even more chaotic. Jenny, who has now completely transformed into a werewolf, finally breaks free from her restraints and immediately attacks her own husband, dead. Amid the panic, Kate takes advantage of the chaos to untie Adrian so the two of them can escape from Jenny. But the situation gets even worse when another werewolf suddenly breaks into the carriage. Since Kate is standing closest to the door, the creature immediately grabs her and drags her outside the train. Adrian briefly tries to hold onto Kate's hand, but because he is too afraid of losing his own life, he eventually lets go and abandons her to the werewolf. Meanwhile, Adrian finds himself trapped inside the same carriage with the fully transformed Jenny, and his options for survival slowly begin disappearing. Jenny starts moving toward him little by little, while Adrian can do nothing except helplessly wait, since he has no weapon and nowhere left to run. Fortunately, just before the situation becomes fatal, the train stopping once again prompts Joe and Ellen to head toward the rear carriage to find out what happened. They arrive just in time and manage to kill Jenny before she can make Adrian her next victim. After everything that has happened, the number of survivors continues to decrease rapidly. At this point, only Joe, Ellen, Adrian, and Billy remain alive. Suddenly, two werewolves manage to break into the train through the rear carriage. Realizing that they cannot survive much longer inside, Joe finally decides that their only chance is to escape into the forest together with Ellen and Adrian. Unfortunately, before they can put the plan into action, Adrian's true selfish nature reveals itself once again. In an attempt to save himself, he deliberately attacks Joe so that the werewolves will focus on him, giving Adrian and Ellen enough time to escape. Joe refuses to remain defenseless and immediately fights back against Adrian. Seeing Adrian's selfish betrayal, Ellen quickly joins Joe and helps him fight back. However, in the middle of the chaos, Adrian manages to escape from the carriage first and grabs the key hanging near the door, leaving Joe and Ellen trapped inside with no way to get out. At the same time, distant howls begin echoing closer and closer as the werewolves slowly surround the area around the train. Just when everything seems completely hopeless, Billy suddenly appears and attempts to distract the creatures by throwing a burning torch toward them. Joe and Ellen immediately use the opportunity to force the door open with the crowbar Billy had given them earlier. Unfortunately, Billy's bravery comes at a terrible price, as he becomes the next target of the remaining werewolves and ultimately falls victim to them. From there, the situation only becomes more desperate. More howls echo throughout the forest, revealing that there are far more werewolves nearby than anyone could have imagined. Realizing that their chances of survival are disappearing with every passing second, Joe finally makes one last decision. He chooses to act as a distraction so Ellen can escape. Not long afterward, an entire pack of werewolves arrives and completely surrounds the area. Joe continues fighting, despite knowing that there is almost no chance he will survive. Eventually, the creatures overwhelm him with their numbers and attack him, giving Ellen the opportunity to run as far away from the nightmare as possible. After traveling a long distance through the forest, Ellen finally reaches Eastbourne Station alive. Covered in blood and wounds, she immediately leaves everyone there confused and horrified, especially because she is still holding Joe's name badge in her hand. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, Adrian continues wandering alone after becoming separated from everyone else. Exhausted and terrified, he suddenly hears strange rustling coming from the nearby bushes. A short while later, Adrian notices Joe's jacket lying on the ground. At first, he believes that Joe might still be alive, but as he approaches, Adrian witnesses something horrifying with his own eyes. Joe is not dead after all. Instead, the earlier attack has transformed him into a werewolf, and before Adrian has any chance to escape, Joe, now no longer human, suddenly pounces on him and sinks his teeth into him. And with that, the story comes to an end.